I'm here because Robert, my son, died. He killed himself 3 months ago. He was 25 years old. I saw him jump from the window. I saw him die. And once downstairs, I also saw a book in his left hand. The same one he had been reading all night. He jumped with it. It seems impossible, but he didn't let go of it when he hit the ground. He lost even a shoe, but held on to his book. It was an effort to pry it from his fingers. Days later, as I leafed through the book, I found a page that had been marked. The book was Moon Palace by the American novelist Paul Auster, and the underlined words were these: I had jumped from the edge of the cliff, and just when I was about to hit the ground, an extraordinary event occurred. I found out that there were people who loved me. That one should be so loved changes everything. It does not diminish the terror of the fall, but it gives you a new perspective on what that terror means. I had jumped from the edge, and then, at the last moment, something held me in the air. That something is what I define as love. It's the only thing that can stop a man from falling. The only thing that's so powerful as to invalidate the laws of gravity. I found more marked pages, words, sentences, but nothing that could shed some light. I could not reproach Mr. Auster for anything, because in his Brooklyn home, basking in his renown as an international author, he doesn't know anything about my son Robert, about how important his work was for him. I decided to read his work, Robert's favorite, to find what he had hidden from me. Like many mothers, I knew my son much less than I thought. It was a long night, very long, like the week, like the year before it, like Robert's face when he arrived around 9 that night. He didn't greet me. He opened the door, shuffled to his room, without looking at me. He had done the same the night before, and the night before that. Another bad day at work, I thought. Another grey and meaningless day. For the last 2 weeks, Robert had been editing videos for a local production company. Videos of weddings, banquets, parties, christenings. My son hated their job. They treated him badly and they paid him even worse, and on top of that he had to deal with hours and hours of unhappiness. For him, every minute there was a confession of failure, because Robert wanted to be a film director. And there he felt like a neurosurgeon cutting steaks at the butcher's. Things were not going well at the personal level too. His abruptness, his impatience had isolated him from the world little by little, and even though he did have a few good friends, he barely kept in touch with them. He had experienced recently a disappointment in love, of which I have no details, but I know that he still suffered from it. He answered very few calls, he avoided going out, and he resisted any serious attempt at conversation. he spent most of his time caged in the gloom of his room. He had installed there 2 monitors, an editing table, and several video devices that he kept permanently hung. Because we were denied access, I surmised this excessive dedication from the hum of those machines and from the light that at night would shine from underneath his door. Some of his sessions were like a marathon. But he never showed us the results of his work, on which he kept a jealous lid. When he went out, he double-locked the door and lowered the blinds. Therefore, for a very long time, I could only glimpse at his room through the keyhole. There was a copy of the key, of course. My husband wouldn't have allowed it any other way, but I used it on very, very few occasions. The last time I entered with my copy, he knew it. I don't know how, but he knew it, and his reaction was so furious that I didn't attempt it again. I mentioned my husband. He had been a physical education instructor in the same institute where I teach. He never spoke with Robert. Quiet and prone to depression since he lost his right hand in a traffic accident. He was on permanent leave and entertained these days at training football leagues. Father and son held almost incompatible schedules. They never sought each other out, and if they coincided on some evening without training or in the dead hours of the weekend, they didn't talk to each other. And I suspect that now that indifference must hurt Miguel, my husband, to the core. By the time he seemed more interested in the football leagues than in the well-being of his only son. However, to be fair, I must admit that I hid things from him, yes. In the worst moments when Robert would hit the walls or smash glasses against the ceiling, I chose to keep quiet, silent. I always attributed his excesses to pending issues between us. That's why I never alerted Miguel. I thought, as long as my son does not raise a hand against me, everything will be under control. I don't know who I was trying to protect with that attitude. It doesn't matter. I was trying to explain what happened on the night of March 12th, what we could call the night before it happened. That day, because it was Friday, we all had dinner at home. Robert was late in coming to the table, but he looked so unhappy that I didn't dare say anything. Pale and haggard, cowering at the kitchen table like a little old man, he seemed so forlorn that even his father asked him if he wanted to go to the doctor, but he just shook his head and fixed his stare on the tablecloth. He was still thin, far too thin, given the athletic build of which he had always been proud. His pants wrinkled at the waist, his shoes fell off his feet, and the pyjama shirt looked 3 sizes too big. He spent the whole evening shuffling the food around the table without eating anything. Prepared to have my head bitten off, I insisted that he try at least the fish fingers. He didn't react, so I dared repeat the request. Whenever I repeated something, he would say to me, "Mom, you're the drill. I have you ingrained in my brain. You tire me. How do you not realize it?" But that time, he didn't say anything. He just looked at me. He looked at me as if that took an infinite effort. He picked up the fork and cut the fish finger in half. And his whole body shuddered. For more than a minute, he didn't move. He just stared at both halves with a look of horror, as if he had committed an abject crime, as if the fish finger suffered for the mutilation undescribable pain. He looked at the fork, he looked at the remains of the fish, and almost retched. He then brought the two halves of the fish finger together, as if trying to restore the original shape. He joined the borders, pressed in the center, but to no avail. Of course, at each new attempt, the fish finger would crumble a little more. So, upset and resigned, he just mashed it with his fork, and then he threw the fork to the floor, as if he were divesting himself of a compromising weapon. He breathed a few times. He relaxed somehow his face muscles, and then with a thin voice, he whispered, "I'm done." For the first time in a long time, he went to bed without closing the door, and didn't turn off the table light until about 6:20 in the morning. Miguel and I hardly slept. I laid on the living room sofa just a few meters from his bed in order to see his legs under the table without him seeing me. And from there, I could also spot the night table on which his hands would rest the red book from time to time. Miguel came to fetch me a few times, but to no avail. I wouldn't move. Robert read all night. The brush of his fingers on the paper marked the beat of my hours until dawn. At 7, he woke up, and without looking at me, he shuffled to the bathroom. After a while, I approached it and saw that he wasn't there. So I looked in the kitchen, and then I looked in his bedroom again, nothing. Worried, I returned to the hallway, and I saw a beam of light. The entrance door was ajar. Miguel was outside, in his pajamas, sitting by the landing, barefoot. I asked him what he was doing there. "I have to go to work," he said. "Today is Saturday," I reminded him. "You don't have anything to do until midday. Besides, you're not going to go to work today. I will call later. I will call them later. Why don't you come in and rest a little?" And he let me lead him like a puppy. I felt his bones as frail as crystal. For a moment, he looked at me with tenderness. I laid him down, and I woke Miguel up. "Robert is not feeling well. We need to call a doctor. But I'm afraid that if he hears me, he will be frightened. Why don't you go downstairs and call from the street?" And he did. While I was preparing coffee in the kitchen, I heard Robert in his room. The door was still open, but now he was dressed. And he was moving some things next to the video. His expression was no longer that of the little puppy of before. No? He had removed the tape from a cassette and was cutting it into little pieces with scissors. When he saw me, he glared at me and slammed the door shut. Robert, please," I said. And then my son just opened the door and showed me his room with great flair. And all his gestures now had something artificial, self-imposed. He pointed to his camera and caressed it. He threw the pieces of tape to the bin. He picked up the book and walked out. How much heat, he said. And I felt it sounded strange. Because he didn't say how hot it is, no, he just said, how much heat, as if he was reciting, as if a prompter had just whispered those words from behind the curtain. We approached the living room window as if thousands of eyes were following us. And then Robert, fanning himself with a book, looked out the window. Fearful I stood between him and the glass, and I suggested a cup of tea in the kitchen. Against all odds, he agreed. He nodded, turned around, and walked away, humming a tune. A bird's cry stopped him in mid-step. And it was like releasing a spring, like the advent of a long-awaited signal. Robert turned around, scanned the sky above my head, identified the bird that had broken the silence, and opened his eyes wide. I could see his temples throbbing. And that's when everything unraveled. An ambulance siren was heard at the end of the avenue. Robert shivered and the veins in his neck tightened like ropes, and his whole face contracted in a grimace of despair. Not knowing what to do, his whole body gave way to a nervous spasm, and I tried to hold him. And then we heard the keys in the lock, and someone opened the entrance door. Miguel, I cried. And almost at the same time, Robert, my son, jumped out the window. When Miguel arrived, he was still struggling, caught in the clotheslines. With his only hand, my husband held him by a leg and supported himself against the window frame. But I didn't look anymore. I did that. Sitting on the floor, paralyzed. I didn't move a finger. I closed my eyes and waited. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't help. When Miguel cried, howled, and rushed down the stairs, I knew that it was all over. And later I learned other things. Amongst them that Robert, my son, had forced his fall by reaching with his hands the window on the lower floor. Nothing will erase from Miguel's mind that struggle. As for me, his broken body will be forever etched in my mind. When I arrived downstairs, almost at the same time as the ambulance, Miguel was trying in vain to revive him. He talked to Robert and told him things that he could no longer hear. For a moment our eyes met, and Miguel broke down crying. I was far away. Someone talked to me. They gave me the book. I heard a scream. I touched Robert. Miguel held me. Nothing. Empty. Hollow. Lost. I remember thinking only one thing. That Miguel's songs sounded exactly like that bird's cry.
I didn't leave him. They made me leave him. The doctors, my sister, even my own daughter. They unmarried me by force to protect me, and because of that, I am still alive. And my husband, though hospitalised, still has my support and can kiss me every week. Many people don't understand it. My family, friends, the uneducated. I saw it very clearly at the party. They didn't understand it when I left him, and today they don't understand how I can still be next to him, if not actually by his side. Nobody knows this, but the worst thing is it was he who told me to save myself, to flee from him, to build this new life. That's been the worst thing to overcome. I left knowing that he wasn't a monster. You see, when I left him, my friends saw him as this saint. And they couldn't understand how I had inexplicably had him locked up. Now they all think of him as just this dirty monster who tried to smother me one night. To try and explain it is to reduce 20 years to a handful of words. And words cannot explain how some visits last just a couple of minutes because he's woken up screaming that he's going to dismember me. Or the next day he's thanking me, crying. The relationship with a psychiatric patient is complex. It's really complex. There are lacerating nuances and so much encapsulated pain. It's pain is the barrier. Many people don't understand it. and I don't understand life without him. At the party, there was a secret gift from one of my brothers. He approached my daughter and he asked her about her father. My daughter, whose constant regret is nobody talks to her about him, even though he's still alive. My daughter, who at 2 years old tried to stand up to him when he threw the fan at me. And she, who comes to visit him every week with me and then has no one to discuss his ups and downs with. How can I explain just how happy that simple question made me feel? Because I'm so sick of the silence and the lies and the taboos. Look, I'm really sorry if I came across as a party pooper, but I couldn't pretend again. I had to say it. I never would have forgiven myself. So that's why I said it. To thank the people at the party and then to immediately underline the absence of the other two people at it. My husband and my older brother. I don't know if my other brothers understood me or even if they approved, but I felt at peace with my conscience and really happy with the look in my daughter's eyes, so full of support. It encouraged me to continue and to ignore the looks of the people at the party who were probably hearing for the first time that I also have a brother with schizophrenia. I can see their faces now. They were probably thinking, oh God, here we go again. Why don't you talk a bit more about delusions and screams, hallucinations or paranoia? But whoever simplifies it like that doesn't understand anything. Doesn't realise that all I want is for my loved ones not to be pushed aside. When I talk about my brother, I don't just talk about his illness. I wasted a lot of his life because of that. No, I talk about other things like how much progress he made when my mother died. It took me a long time to understand why, and then I remembered that he'd always felt badly about being a burden to my mum. Poor love. So sensitive, so barely aware of so many things, yet relieved not to be a torment to her. I spoke to him yesterday, and to my husband. They're so different, the two of them, and yet both victims of the same disease. No one can understand how my brother, who is so stunned, so depressed, so incapable of action, can suffer from exactly the same thing as my husband, with his delusions and spectacular paranoia, his hyperactivity and his violent reactions. One of the first doctors that I consulted asked me if I thought it was a coincidence that I'd married somebody with schizophrenia. Maybe not. Maybe I've always been attracted to special people. After all, when I was a little girl, I wanted to be a nurse. But when I met my husband, he was the antithesis of my brother. He was extroverted, pure energy. I never made the connection because my brother has never heard voices. He certainly never felt persecuted. My brother just went out, bit by bit, like a match, until he became what he is today, a memory of a flame. In any case, they have both illuminated my life, and they both continue to do so, which is why I really wanted them to come to the party. They didn't come. No, they couldn't. No, they couldn't be there, and that's why I had to point out their absence. For that reason, and and also for my daughter. It's taken me a long time to quite know how to answer all her questions. But then I took the best advice that I've ever been given. Explain everything. Tell your daughter, without upsetting her, but firmly, that her father is sick and there is absolutely nothing to be ashamed of. Of course, it's taken me decades to get on board with that one. I've told people thousands of times why I left him, why he's in the hospital, why he doesn't even know where we live. But the other day I was looking at some old photographs and it occurred to me there are aspects that I've hardly explained. And that's why I wanted to share them, suddenly at the party. It wasn't easy, nor comfortable. I'm so sick of the secrets and so fed up of the pretense and of not feeling proud of all the good things in my life because of them. So while we're talking about doing the wrong thing, I'm going to say something I've never said out loud before. At home, they never forgave me for going to Paris. My parents were religious and very traditional, and they never forgave me. Nor did my brothers. I can say it now, but of course perfecting my French wasn't the reason for my trip. I just wanted to escape from it all, from the atmosphere that prevailed at home because of my brother's depression. I escaped everything to oxygenate myself. And then I returned with a husband who my father couldn't even bear to look at in a photo. My husband had gone to France when he was about 21. Also fleeing a really difficult family situation. His father mistreated him. He would point a shotgun at his head. Really punished him harshly. His mother, terrified, did everything she could to distract him. She taught him how to sing, to play the piano, but he never forgave her. He always blamed his mother for not rescuing him from hell. When we met, I was so in need of affection that his exquisite manners and his wonderful mind just dazzled me. I knew at once that I had met this exceptional human being. Me, who'd come from this very traditional and provincial, repressed family, had found the teacher who would teach me to love. I did almost finish with him, though, on one of our first dates. After his violent reaction when I asked him what he'd do if I was ever unfaithful. But it was such an isolated incident. I just soon became beguiled by him, and his tenderness and his affection just won me over, and within a year we got married. The wedding was almost a miracle because my parents did everything they could to make sure it didn't happen. They even tried to lock me up to stop me going back to Paris to pursue what they said was a very sinful relationship with a socialist. But socialism had very little to do with my husband. If anything, he was on his way to becoming a run-of-the-mill businessman. He'd studied mathematics and economics and had started working for this growing company. I think by the time of the wedding, he'd almost become an executive. He and I, we'd never planned on settling in Paris. But I didn't think going back was a good thing to do either. But we talked about it a lot, and then we came to the conclusion that we probably should. His relationship was much better with my family by then, and he also had these really good work contacts. So he became partner with this wealthy businessman, and I took on a job as a translator. We had our daughter, and we became really close friends with our neighbours. We had family, work, a social life. Yeah, it felt like a dream. And then just like that, we woke up. The problems started at work. My partner's husband was authoritarian, very particular about things, and my husband developed this really bad relationship with him, not dissimilar to the dynamics that he had had with his father. He hated him, but he was also very afraid of him. So he always tried to see his side, did his best to stick by him. But the tension between them grew until his partner sold his share of the company to an American multinational. My husband ended up being an employee of his own company. I mean, he could have left. He could have taken any job. He was qualified, spoke several languages. He was very cultured. But he became obsessed with the company, secretly dreaming that he'd get it back one day. And that's when he started searching for microphones throughout the house, screaming that the Americans had hired detectives to harm him. He said that he'd become suspicious after listening to a radio show about the same thing. I just saw him so stressed out with work. I didn't for a minute think it was a symptom of anything. But then maybe I didn't want to. You always think that it happens to other people, not you. But no. The illness comes suddenly, and it grows until you're entangled by it. He started to get aggressive. He'd break things in anger. He became more elusive. I saw him more and more cornered, and I made the mistake of insisting, of harassing him, of bombarding him with questions, until one day he just attacked me. He slapped me across the face, and he screamed that I was mean and ungrateful. At first, I didn't quite register what had happened. It kind of took me off guard, but then I finally got him to calm down and to stop, and then he told me. He explained everything to me, even though I could barely believe what I was hearing. I, his wife, was also an American spy. In his delirium, he was convinced that I had only married him following orders from my superiors. He believed, or rather, he knew, that it was all a sham, and I was acting on orders from the President of the United States. I find it very hard to talk about those years. I think my mind has somehow tried to erase the memories in order to survive. Beatings alternated with moments of great tenderness. There were periods of lucidity and periods of nightmares, and it wasn't always easy to distinguish the two. Some days I was this traitor, and then the next I would be this holy saint who should be worshipped on an altar. It was hard. He would apologise and cry and promise he'd never do it again, and then just like that he'd turn on me. He never neglected his personal habits. His mother's education was so ingrained in him that he always maintained his hygiene. Even at the height of it, he always maintained his capacity to find some order amongst the chaos. And his intelligence, too, remained unchanged, despite the ravings. I remember when he was about to be released, after the first time he got sectioned, and I felt he wasn't right still. He was coming out with these crazy things like, oh, I can't wait to get out next week because I can finally stand to be leader of the Conservative Party. Or that he had to go to Zagreb to meet the Emperor of Antarctica. I asked him what the doctors had thought about these plans, and he told me not to be silly. Of course he hadn't told them, because then they wouldn't release him. And that's when I realised just how devastating the combination of intelligence and mental illness is, because on more than one occasion he proved himself far more astute than the professionals who were treating him. Look, I won't detail the highs and lows of those years because, well, they'd be endless. Personal favourites, though, included him throwing objects at the TV, or when he thought that the animals were speaking to him in Spanish and chasing him. And then there was the night, of course, that he tried to smother me with a pillow. They sectioned him after that. My concern, however, at this time wasn't for me. It was, of course, for my daughter. She was just a little girl at the time, and she had on many occasions had to stand between her father and me. It was actually her who got me to realise that my husband's ravings were not temporary. They weren't caused by stress at work. I just don't think I grasped the situation before then. Even on the night that he tried to murder me, it was the doctors who told me that I couldn't stay with him anymore. I was oblivious. Because his attacks were so irrational and unpredictable, I didn't quite get the danger that I was in. But then one day my daughter saw me crying, and she came to me, and she was only 7 years old, and she said, "Mummy, please don't cry. You've already told me that Daddy's not dead like Grandma. Daddy's just sick." And suddenly, me, who had been ignoring this medical diagnosis, who had been living with it behind closed doors, just as I'd learned to do from my parents, who was ashamed of it and refusing to acknowledge the situation, I just grabbed my daughter and I hugged her and I thanked her for opening my eyes. And I got rid of all the guilt. And I left. And I never went back. It wasn't easy. In the beginning, when he lived alone, a neighbour would watch over him to check he could manage. He still fought with the TV. He still heard voices. But I had to remain on the sidelines. We all advocate for the rights of the sick, especially when it's a family member. But those rights cannot infringe on the rights of a child to live their childhood without fear. And you only truly get that when you're out of it, when you've put the madness behind you. And you surprise yourself one afternoon sitting on the sofa with your daughter, not in fear of what's going to happen next. We spent years in this tiny flat. It was the only place that I could afford. But after all the horrors, we really felt at peace there. It really was a refuge in the storm. And it allowed me to continue loving him. I still visit him. He still has my support. I call him regularly. He still doesn't know where I live, just in case one day he manages to get out and track down the American spy. His delusions have always been so vivid, so persistent. It's like they've been recorded in a part of his brain indelibly. But there's something behind those conspiracies, and that's something that I'm not willing to lose. It's the best thing that has united me to anyone ever. And I've learned so much from him. It was he who taught me to forgive my parents for their censure and their fears, their limitations. And that was the reason for the sermon at my party. I think it was a speech that nobody expected me to give. Because now that I am 50 years of age, now that they can even celebrate my half a century, now I can finally tell the truth. I know my daughter faces a hereditary risk, and I know that my health is beginning to falter because of all the hardships that I've endured. And I know in life, especially in these circumstances, there are no guarantees. But I don't care anymore. With age, I have become brave, and I will stand by my brother and my husband, and I will defend them against all. Because yes, I have suffered. I have stood at the edge of the abyss, and I have almost failed in my attempt to survive, but I made it. They, however, have not. Some of their gazes leave me breathless. They convey such sadness and hopelessness that I forget everything that I've ever lived. I'm not crying for my life, I cry for theirs, and I want to scream and howl till I burst, because no one deserves the hell of schizophrenia. And because of that, and because of all that joins me to my husband, I will accompany them now, and I will continue to do so to the end. I will be by their side at the very end when they finally, their minds expel the pain and the abyss that has separated them from the world closes, and I can finally bury them and say to them without cliche, rest, rest in peace. My story is a tale. One of princesses, very pretty, and sad, yes, also a little sad. Mine is a true love story, with adventures, knights, palaces, and even a dog. He was a dragon. It has princesses. But not storybook princesses. Oh, no way. It has princesses like the royal kind. Like princesses from girly magazines. Paper mache princesses like me. I'm not made of paper, I'm made of flesh and braid. I'm flesh and bone. I'm made of flesh and bone. Anyway, here goes my story. My sad and pretty tale, so pretty, it will want to make you cry. Once upon a time, there was a very pretty princess. That was me. I was beautiful. I was as thin as a pencil, yes.
I weighed 47 kilos. And I lived with my sister Helen, who was married. I studied architecture, and I was very quiet. Very quiet, and I went red. If I ever saw a boy or had to sit an exam. The thing is, I did not have friends, nor time, nor desire to find them, because I was so lonely. Lonely. And it was horrible. All because I had left home. I don't know what was worse. I lived with my parents, my 5 siblings, and I, the little one. But we were doing badly. My father used to get drunk and beat us, and my brothers would flee to the clubs, leaving my mother and I to pay the bill. One day he behaved so badly that we abandoned him, and we found another house. And he found us, and we had to suffer him again. I used to hide in the bathroom and read romance novels and cut out articles from girly magazines. I still have those photos of Prince William, Karen, Monica, and Prince Charles, yes. Even Prince Charles. They seem so extraordinary, but now they just seem like normal people. Oh, how I dreamt of being like them, living like them. But my life was much sadder, more or less until my dad died, and I was so happy. I will always remember, always remember that day. I was eating quietly, and I thought to myself, how is Dad? Then someone told me he was dead, and I thought, oh good, and carried on. Things changed, I became more beautiful and beautiful. I even had a suitor. But my mother, brothers, and sisters still treated me very badly. So, when my sister Helen got married, I asked her to take me with her. But I did not realize that the princess that I wanted to be was very far away. Very far away. And I would have to wait. Like Cinderella. I was 20 years old and I wanted to go out at night and live my life. And I met some very nice girls. The first one was Sophia. She did not have a father like me. She introduced me to the others, Christine, Diana, and Isabel, all very nice. I even saw Diane the other day, and she's not changed at all. Isabel, I gave a call, and she said, "Oh, Megan," because she knows I like to be called Megan. "They're fixing my jacuzzi. Would you mind calling back another time? This is very inconvenient." She's a character. That was a few days ago, even a few months, but I'm sure she'll call back when she has time, because she loves me very much, yes, very much. Oh. Am I straying from the story?
Oh, it's alright.
Okay. Well, this is not a story. Once upon a time, there was a very pretty girl. That was me. That was me, who lived with her sister, and who would fight with her sister at all hours of the morning. Oh, the fights. The fights. All because I wanted to go out tonight. Well, I don't know what she was complaining about, because I did all the cleaning. All of it, yeah, all of it. I would clean the floors. And one day I cleaned the floor all day, just to make her happy. And oh, was she happy. She was so happy that she bought me a pair of trousers, and they were so beautiful. I mean, beautiful. The only thing is I did not get to wear them very much, because she threw me out onto the street 2 days later. On the street. It was Wednesday, a day of general cleaning in the house, yes. And I was exhausted. I'd had exams and I could barely stand. So I sat on the sofa. I watched the life of the rich and famous. And I fell asleep like a log. Helen came in screaming, get out of here, you lazy bones, good for nothing. Wow, she was furious. Furious. Like that witch. You know, the one that looked in the mirror? The stepmother. That one, yeah. Well, I didn't know where to go, so I called my sister Victoria. She'd already spoken to Helen. And she said, as far as she was concerned, I could go under a bridge. A bridge. I cried and I cried. I did not know who to turn to, so I called Sophia. And she said, oh, Megan, why didn't you call me before? Of course you can come over. She's so nice. I was fine for a while at Sophia's. But all good things must come to an end. So she said, oh, Megan, time to get you a little job. And she found an advert in the paper for a maid, for a young couple that lived in the suburbs. And we called them, well, she called them. She's very, very sharp. And they said it was urgent. It was urgent, and I needed to go straight away. And the offer was for salary, food, and living in. It was amazing. I felt so happy. This could be my chance to be independent and continue my studies without relying on anybody. So I dressed beautifully, oh yes. I put on my best clothes. I even had a manicure. I looked as pretty as a picture on a picture. So pretty. They liked me very, very much. Because when I turned up after the meeting, they hired me. So it seemed rude to leave Sophia, but well, this was my chance. Charles, who was the owner of the house, came to pick me up in a van that they had for the dogs. Although he was 27 years old, he still owed everything. He was the man of the house. And I said goodbye to my friends there and then. Bye. Not gonna see you again. I would miss them. And I went to work at the house of Mr. and Mrs. Semper. And the house was great, yes. Great. It was like a luxury